Lórcan, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Like,
I think we'll jump straight in. I suppose first of all, we're all aware of how deeply polarised public debate has become in Ireland, Europe, and the West on the life issue, though I suppose not exclusively just there.
mhm.
From your perspective, and given your close involvement through your work with Alliance Defending Freedom, can you share your thoughts in general terms on the current state of play and how serious things have become? And I suppose indeed how dangerous things have also become.
Yes, thank you, Sheila. You're completely, the premise of your question is completely correct. Things have, alas, become a lot more polarized politically across the Western world. Obviously, abortion is both a moral, legal, and political question. All these things are tied together, and it has, in many ways, I think, become the fulcrum or the center point of a lot of the discussions we're having about the type of society we want, where we're going, because it embraces a whole range of things, like questions around human rights, around demographics, around the sexual revolution. All of these things come together, legal, medical, moral questions in abortion. And it can provoke, as we know, extremely unpleasant reactions from those who are advocates for abortion. We saw that in 2018 during the referendum in Ireland. Pro-life campaign workers were attacked on more than one occasion while canvassing for the right to life of the unborn. I see it in the UK and across Europe, where people who are doing sidewalk counselling, so they're witnessing for the right to life, are frequently subject of abuse, harassment, physical attacks by members of the public, usually activists, frankly, who are targeting them. And in many cases, what happens is the police will arrive and they'll arrest the pro-life advocates rather than the attackers. And I have plenty of examples of that. And then, of course, as you alluded to, we've had even more extreme violence. For example, the assassination, the murder of Charlie Kirk, who was one of this generation's great advocates for the right to life. Much of his work on campuses across the United States was to lift up the unborn child and its right to life. So this is an extremely difficult time, but I think it shows in some ways that those who are engaged in any kind of support for the right to life, whether it be sidewalk counselling, other kinds of support, charitable work for mothers and for unborn children, whether it be the type of activism that the pro-life campaign engages in, that you're on the front line in a lot of ways on what is a moral, political, and frankly, let's be clear, spiritual battle as well. And I think it is probably the battle of our time. And what we've seen, particularly after the Roe versus Wade decision was overturned by the US Supreme Court, is an increasing extremism in rhetoric from the pro-abortion side. We saw in the United Kingdom as well, where it was decriminalized, abortion was decriminalized up to birth. These are all examples of a counter reaction to what is increasingly a growing awareness of the tragedy and the inhumanity of abortion. And as more and more people become aware, thanks to Charlie Kirk and the pro-life campaign and all the others who are doing amazing work on the right to life, as more of us become aware of the humanity of the unborn child, as more members of the public do, you can expect to see a stronger and stronger reaction from the pro-abortion advocacy side. And sadly, and increasingly, I think it's taken on aggressive forms, and we need to take a clear stand against that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, many people that will be joining our webinar this evening are activists, and they know only too well how polarized this debate has become and how much increased the intolerance has become towards the pro-life side. Do you think there is an element of the fact that the realization that the pro-abortion side are losing the intellectual argument? Do you think that that has, resulted in an increase in intolerance and violence towards those with pro-life persuasion?
I certainly do. I mean, the pro-abortion side, frankly, was always an elite project. It was driven by political elites and people who were intellectually activist in the feminist movement and particularly usually on the political left. And they are not just losing on the abortion issue. They're losing on a whole range of issues because a whole series of claims that they've made about reality um, are falling apart now. That the permissive society that they ushered in the 1960s and subsequently has proven to be a disaster for civilization. We have record amounts of mental health problem, increasingly loneliness, degrees of breakdowns of social trust. All of that is extreme and unprecedented, and it all stems from a view of the human person that was pushed by these elites that is fundamentally wrong. It detaches people from their spiritual element. It detaches them from family and all of the other aspects that make human flourishing necessary, or all the other necessary aspects for human flourishing, I should say. And that project now, we're kind of 2 generations into it, and it's been an utter failure on so many levels. And that's why you see now increasingly, particularly Gen Z, questioning so many of the claims that have been made about reality. And on the life issue, I think that's a natural part of it. Women have been told for a long time that the priority in their life should be certain things about self-fulfillment and career and so on. And I think you now see increasingly a view among young women that has resulted in an unsatisfied and empty kind of consumerist life. And part of that, of course, a big part of it was abortion as a contraception form. And that now is being challenged in an unprecedented way in the United States and across Europe. Ireland is lagging behind for all kinds of reasons. But it'll change in Ireland too. I mean, our particular elite is still committed to ideas that have failed elsewhere. And they're slow on the uptake, but it's going to change here as well, just like it's changing everywhere else.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Ireland, and specifically just to talk about Ireland and the whole area of freedom of speech, freedom to express your point of view. Can we talk maybe a little bit about Commission Lamon, Ireland's new media regulator? For those who are not familiar with this body, you might briefly outline what it does and the threat that it poses to freedom of speech and open debate in Ireland, and further afield.
Yeah, Commission Myan is essentially the new regulator for media in Ireland. Previously, there was the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland that's now been abolished, and this is the new body with an increased mandate to include not just terrestrial broadcasting licenses, but also regulation of online speech. And it has powers, obviously, that have been granted by statute in Ireland. It also has powers granted by virtue of the European Union through a thing called the Digital Services Act. Now, the reason that the Irish regulator is important is because a lot of the tech companies where we have our freedom of expression, or rather where the digital public square, as they call it now, happens, are based in Dublin. So Meta, of course, was Facebook, X, which was Twitter, Google, with all of its various products and platforms, and others. They're all based in Dublin. So they're regulated first and foremost by the Irish Media Commission, or Commission Myan, Oscailga. And that means that Ireland is essentially, Dublin is ground zero for the efforts at increasing global censorship of speech online. And because of the powers that the Media Commission has, they've increasingly used them, or going to use them, to cut down on so-called hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, and so on. And this is a major issue, of course, for the cause of the life issue, because a lot of the conversation that happens now between people on all kinds of political issues and on the right to life, raising awareness about it, happens over the internet. It happens over social media. People share stories with each other. They share pictures and graphics and memes and so on. And so Charlie Kirk, again, we mentioned, it was a great example of this. He would speak to an audience in a university of maybe a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand, but his message would go to millions across the internet. So if the internet is increasingly censored in a way that removes views that are totally legitimate views, part of the public debate, then we're going to really see an impact on the erasing awareness that the pro-life campaign and others want to achieve. We saw this in 2018. Mark Zuckerberg was clear that they deprioritized and in many ways hid ads from the pro-life campaign. So that people, members of the public, were denied the opportunity to hear our side of the story. So the internet is really the front line, and tech regulation in Dublin is the front line of the battle for free speech. And it's a real shame and a tragedy that we have this tech regulator that has shown itself, frankly, to be hostile to free speech. And it's all based in Dublin, and the Irish government is allowing itself through the European Union as well, and our authorities, such as the Media Commission, to act as a global censorship engine. And I think we need to be more aware of this and criticise it more strongly.
Absolutely, we really need to keep an eye on what's going to happen next there. Just to zone in, just specifically on the pro-life issue, Lorcan, and maybe some of the work that you're doing. I know we've talked in general terms around the issue, but you might maybe give us some, recent examples or concrete examples of that demonstrate how real and serious things are. Evidence that it's not just a theoretical concern, but a serious growing challenge, and maybe talk a little bit, maybe some actual examples of the work that you're doing.
Sure. The right to life is constantly, of the unborn child, is constantly being challenged in Europe and at the United Nations. So my colleagues and I are often working on that, trying to amend UN documents or fight cases at the European Court of Human Rights. One thing increasingly, though, just to pick up on what we discussed a moment ago, where you see a crackdown on pro-life activity is on the ability of us to speak directly to women who are considering abortions. And there has been a whole series of these so-called buffer zones created around the world, Germany, the United Kingdom, and sadly our own country, to prevent consensual conversations happening in a public place between somebody who may or may not be considering an abortion and a sidewalk counsellor or a pro-life advocate. And I know in the coming weeks, you have the pro-life conference in Dublin. Isabel Vaughan Spruce will be speaking at that. Isabel is just a really amazing woman and a great example of somebody who has witnessed against the tragedy of abortion for many years. She speaks to women who are considering abortions. She prays near abortion clinics. She has been subjected to arrest, detention, harassment by the police in the UK for many years as a result of her pro-life witness. And that's something we're seeing more and more of, whether you're being censored online or you're being arrested for actually having pro-life signs or pro-life messages in public places. It's a crackdown on our right to freely speak to others, to speak to members of the public. And it's been driven again in reaction to, as we were saying, like a growing awareness that abortion is an injustice, that it's a tragedy, and that it harms obviously the unborn child and the mother as well. So it's the front line is again speech. It's witnessing. It's telling the story of this great wrong, this injustice of our age, and people like Isabel are at the front line of that, and we're very happy to stand alongside them and support them.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting, just as somebody observing that case from a distance, how that unified many voices that were pro freedom of expression, freedom of speech, who wouldn't necessarily be from a pro-life
Mm.
perspective. What are your thoughts on that, Lorcan?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, Sheila, because if you truly believe in the right to freedom of expression, you have to, on occasion, defend those whom you don't agree with. And I think we've seen over the years now that people who we could have disagreements with, like maybe Graham Lenihan, who was arrested for making remarks about trans people online. We may not have agreed with the remarks he made either, but you have to have, in a society that really is the cornerstone of a democracy is free speech. Because if you can't persuade people to change their minds through speech, then you're not really operating in a democratic system. So we have found, you're completely correct, allies on the speech issue that wouldn't agree with us at all on the life issue. And I think that's right. I mean, I would also support for example, feminists who are opposed to surrogacy or other kind of things that are not really necessarily on our issue, like the transgender issue and women's spaces and so on. Um, and I wouldn't agree with them on a whole range of things, particularly on the life issue where there's usually the biggest division. But if there's a willingness to recognize that freedom of expression is a human right, it's protected in Bunreacht na HÉireann, it's protected in international law, and that if we don't all come together to defend it, it'll be taken away from everybody increasingly. So I'm impressed with that, and it means we have an opportunity as well to show people who we would normally disagree with that actually, there's a reasonableness and a truth at the heart of what we're advocating for, and this is the opportunity to change minds and to speak to people across various types of cultural and other divides.
Absolutely. It starts conversations, which is
Yeah,
really, really important. It gives us an opportunity to speak to some people that we wouldn't normally speak to. So it does give you some hope for the future. Looking ahead, Lorcan, where do you see things going over the next few years? Obviously, there is that area that gives you some hope. What do you think are the biggest positives on the horizon? And I suppose on the flip side, the main dangers or difficulties we need to be ready for. And I suppose it would be nice to finish on some optimism or hope, but maybe you might outline some of the challenges and some things that we can be hopeful for.
sure, sure. Well, those who know me well know that I'm not usually in the optimism business. In the short and medium term, I'm usually quite pessimistic. In the long term, I'm optimistic because the truth will win out, and so long as we commit ourselves to defending the truth, and the ultimate source of truth, of course, is spiritual. As long as we commit ourselves to defending the truth in public, then I think you will eventually change hearts and minds. And some of the terrible things we've seen over the course of the 20th century hopefully will be abolished in the 21st, and abortion be chief among those, which has just been an ongoing tragedy for our countries and our civilization. What gives me hope is that, and I think many of you people listening will perhaps agree with me, that the young generation is at an inflection point. Their minds are being changed among kind of so-called Gen Z at a much greater rate than anything I've ever seen. Like, I'm a millennial, and I can tell you, over my years in school and university and other things, like there's pretty much consensus among my generation that abortion is totally normal and necessary, and just a whole range of other kind of like what we might call modern Ireland orthodoxies. That are being challenged elsewhere. But when I meet, particularly young guys in their early 20s, late teens, like it's fascinating to see that they are questioning this stuff in a really quite robust way. And that's not just the case in Ireland. It's definitely the case here in the UK. I'm speaking to you from London. It's the case across Europe and across the Western world. That's why Charlie Kirk and others were getting such breakthrough in universities. So all is not lost. I know we're probably at a low point in Ireland in a lot of ways in our society right now. But there is change on the horizon. And what I think all of us have to do is keep the conversations going, particularly engage with younger people and recognize that nothing is set in stone. And while things may seem pretty grim now, change is coming in. A key part of that is freedom of speech. That's why I'm focused on that quite a lot. If you can keep free speech open, people will respond to the truth when they hear it. So I think that's probably the most optimistic note I can end on.
Well, we definitely need to end there on that optimistic note. Thank you, Lorcan, so much for the work that you and Alliance Defending Freedom do. Also, we really appreciate it. And thank you so much for giving your time to
Thank you.
us today.
My pleasure.